Our Part 1506, Other Requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act. Limitation of the action of the National Environmental Policy Act process. Eliminating duplication with the state and local procedures. Adoption, combining documents of agency responsibility. Public involvement. Further guidance, proposal, legislation, filing, requirement, timing of the agency action. 11 emergencies, and 12 effective date. 1506.1 Limitation action for the during the National Environmental Policy Act until agency the issue record of decision provided with the 1505.2 with except the provided in paragraph C with the section no action concerning the proposal should be taken with would have adversely impact environmental impact limited to choice with a reasonable and alternative if the agency considers the applicable form with a non-federal entity is aware that the applicant is about to take an action with the agency jurisdiction would either meet with the criteria paragraph A of the section of the agency shall probably notify the applicant of the agency shall show appropriate action with the ensure the objective of the procedure for the National Environmental Policy Act are achieved while working on the required program environmental impact statement. The program of the action is not covered the existing program statement. The agency shall undertake with the aim of the interim of the major federal action covered by the program, which may be significantly affect the quality of the human environment unless the action is justified independently with the program is itself accompanied with adequate environmental impact statement that will not prejudice of the ultimate decision of the program. Interim action prejudice the ultimate decision of the program will determine the subsequent development or limited alternatives. The section does not preclude the development of applicants playing with the design with the performance of the other necessary to support applicant federal, state, and local permits. If nothing in this section shall preclude the Rural Electrification Administration approval of the minimum expenditure for the non-affecting the environment, long lead time and equipment. The purchase option may be made with the non-governmental entities seeking loan grants from the administration. All right, with 15062, the eliminating duplication within state and local procedures. Agencies authorized by local law to cooperate with the state agency statewide jurisdiction pursuant to the section 1022D. Whether this act may do so, agents shall cooperate with the state and local agencies to the full extent possible. Reduce duplication between the National Environmental Policy Act and state with the requirements of the agency specifically bared unless the agencies are specifically barred from doing so by some other law. Simply the case for the covered by paragraph A of the section should cooperation shall be to the full extent of the possible include with the joint planning exercise process, joint environmental research study with the joint public hearings, except for the otherwise provided with the statute, joint environmental assessment agency for the shall cooperate with the state and local agency to the full extent possible, reduplicating of the between the National Environmental Policy Act with comparable to state local requirements unless the agency is specifically barred from doing so by some other law, except exempt from the cases covered in the paragraph A of the section. Such cooperation for the extent possible includes joint environmental impact statement. In such case, one or more federal agencies with one or more state local agencies shall be joint lead agencies, and where state, local, and ordinances have environmental impact statement requirements of addition, but not in conflict with those of the National Environmental Policy Act, federal agencies shall cooperate with the following, fulfilling these requirements as well as those of the federal law. So, with one document, will comply with the applicable laws. To better integrate with the environmental impact statement, the statement of local planning process. The statement will discover the inconsistency proposed action with approved state with local plan and laws, whether or not to federally sanctioned, whether inconsistently exists with the statement. It shall describe the extent of the agency would reconcile the proposed action within the plan or law. Alright, 15063 adoption. An agency may adopt the federal draft and final environmental impact statement or portion thereof that provide with the statement, a portion that meets with the standard of the adequate with the statement under these regulations. If the action covered by the original environmental impact statement of the proposed action or subsequent in the same agency adoption with another agency statement, it is not required to recirculate and is accepted with the final statement. Otherwise, adoption agency with the statement if the draft recirculated except the provided in paragraph C of this section. A cooperative agent may adopt without recirculating environmental impact statement the lead agency where the independent review of the statement with the cooperating agency conclude with the comments of the suggestion has been satisfied. Where agencies adopt the statement with the non-final agency with the prepared with the other action excessive with the subject of the referral under Part 1504 when the statement of the adequacy with the subject of the judicial action with the not final with the agency shall so specify. 15064 combining documents. Environmental document in compliance with the National Environmental Protection Act may be combined with any other agency document to reduce duplication paperwork. 15065 of the agency responsibility information agency required with the application of the supplemental environmental information possible you for the agency preparing with the environmental impact statement. Then the agency shall receive the applicant outlining type of the information required with the agency shall independently evaluate the information submitted or reasonably with the accuracy. If the agency showed with the use of the information submitted by the applicant with the environmental impact statement, either directly or by reference of the name of the person responsible for the independent evaluation shall include the list of the preparers. 1502.17 as independent of the paragraph with acceptable work with not redone, but that is verified by the agency. Environmental assessment if the agency permits for the application to prepare environmental assessment of the agency the side of the fulfilling the requirement of paragraph A of the section shall make of its own evaluation environmental issue for the take with responsibility of the scope of the content of the environmental assessment. The environmental impact statement is accepted as provided in 15062 and 15063. Any environmental impact statement to prepare pursuant to the requirements of the National Environmental Protection Act, Policy Act shall be prepared with a directive of the contractor selected by the lead agency where appropriate under the 150163 cooperating agency. It is an intent of the regulations of the contractor by chosen solely with the lead agency by the lead agency's cooperation with the cooperating agency where an appropriate with the cooperating agency avoid any of the conflict interests the contractor shall execute the disclosure statement of the prepared lead agency where appropriate cooperating agency specifying that there is no financial or other interest in the outcome of the project. With the final document is prepared by contract with a reasonable federal and official with the shall be furnished with the guides and participating in the preparation shall independently evaluate the statement prior to its approval to take on responsibility for the scope of the contents. Nothing in this section is intended to prohibit any of the agency from requesting any person to submit information to it or prohibiting any person from submitting information to an agency. 15066 Public involvement. The agencies make a diligent effort to make it involve the public in the preparing and implementing of the National Environmental Policy Act procedures. Proceed public notice of the National Policy Act related to the hearings, public meetings, the availability of environmental documents. So inform those persons of the agency who may be interested and are affected. In all cases, the agency shall mail notices to whom the request of the individual action. In the case of the action of the inaction effect for the national concern notice, which will include the publication of the Federal Register's notice by mail. National organization reasonably expected interested matter that may include limited of the 102 monitoring where the agency engaged with the rulemaking may provide the notice by mail to the national organization and have the request for the notice of the regularly be provided with the agency shall maintain a list of such organizations. In such a case, the action effective the primarily low concern with the notice of the may include notice of the state area-wide clearinghouse pursuant to the Office of Management Budget Circular 8095 revised notice of any tribes which affects many of the reservation following effective state public notice of the procedure with the comparable actions, publication local newspaper and paper to general circulation rather than legal note paper to notice for the other local media notice for the potential interested community organization include the small business association publication newsletter that may be expected to reach with potential interested person direct mailing to the owners and occupants nearly affected property posting of the notice of the on and off site within the area where the action is to be located. Hold and sponsor public meeting with the public meeting whenever the appropriate in accordance with the statutory requirement applicable to the agency. Criteria shall include whether this is substantial environmental controversy clear concerning with the pros actions substantiating interesting holding the hearing as a request for the hearing with any other agency with the jurisdiction of the action supported with the region with the hearing with the helpful if the draft environmental impact is to be considered within the public hearing the agency shall make with a statement available to the public at least 15 days in advance unless for the purpose of the hearing to provide information for the draft environmental impact statement, solicit appropriate information from the public, explaining the procedure for the who interested person can get information, status report, environmental impact statements, and other elements of the National Environmental Protection Policy Act. Make environmental impact statement of the components received and underlying documents available to the public pursuant the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act, Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552, without regard to exclusion of the interagency memorandum, wherever the subject of the memorandum transmits the comments of the federal agency for the environmental impact with the proposed action materials to be made available to the public and should be provided to the public without charge to the extent of the practical or at a cost fee of not more than the actual cost of the reproducing copies required to be sent to the other federal agencies, including the council. All right, 15067. Further guidance. Council may provide further guidance concerning the National Environmental Policy Act for the procedures included. The handbook with the council may be supplemental from time to time, which is plain language provided the guidance and instruction concerning the application of the National Environmental Policy Act for these regulations. Publication of the council memorandum head of the agencies in conjunction with the Environmental Protection Agency. The publication of the 102 monitoring noticing research activities meeting conferences related with the National Environmental Policy Act and successful innovation procedures used by agencies to implement the National Environmental Policy Act. 15068 for the proposal of legislation, the National Environmental Policy Act process, proposal for the legislation 15008-17 with the significantly affected with the quality of the human environmental with the showing the degree of the legislative process of the Congress, legislative environmental impact statement, the detail of the statement that required for the law to be included, recommendation of the report of the legislative process proposal for the Congress, legislative environmental impact statement that shall be considered part of the formal transmittal, legislative proposal for the Congress, however, that may be transmitted to the Congress up to 30 days later in order to allow the time of completion with the accurate statement with the conservative the base of the public and congressional debate. The statement may be available at the time of the congressional hearings and deliberation of the preparation of legislative environmental impact shall be conform to the requirements of these regulations except as followed with the need for the need to not to be scoping process. The legislative statement shall be prepared with the same meaning of the draft statement and shall be considered with the detailed statement required with the statute, provided that with any of the following conditions exist both in draft the final environmental impact statement and the legislative proposal should be prepared and circulated with the provided in 1503.1 and 1506.10. The Congressional Committee with the jurisdiction of their proposals has rule requiring both draft and final environmental impact statement of the proposal results. Study case for the required with the statute, such for the required by the Wild Scenic Rivers Act and the Wilderness Act. Legislative approval is sought through the federal and federally assist with the construction of the project agency for the recommendation of local, specifically geographical location proposal requiring environmental impact. Statement acquisition of space by General Services Administration draft statement that shall accompany with the prospectus of the other 11B reporting building project survey to Congress. Final statement that shall be completed before the site agency. Site acquisition. The agency decides to prepare the draft of the final statement. The comments for the legislative statement shall be given to the lead agency, which shall forward them along the response of the Congressional Committee in the jurisdiction. 15069 filing requirements of environmental impact statement together with a comment response for the OB filed with the Environmental Protection Agency. Attention, Office of Federal Activities, 1200 Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest Washington, D.C. 20460. Statements should be filed with Environmental Protection Agency. No other than also transmitted to commanding agency made available to the public of the Environmental Protection Agency. Shall deliver one copy of each statement to the Council and the most satisfied with the requirement of availability to the President. Environmental Protection Agency may issue the guidelines agency for the implement the responsibility under Section 150610. Alright, 150610, timing of the agency action. Environmental Protection Agency shall purpose publish for the notice of the Federal Register each week of the environmental impact statement filed during the preceding week with a minimum time period set forth in this section. Shall be calculated with the date of the publication of the notice. No decision of the proposed action shall be made with a recorded in 15052 by the federal agencies until later of the following dates. 90 days after the publication notice described above the paragraph A of this section of the draft environmental impact statement. 30 days after the publication of the notice described in paragraph A of the statement, this section of the final environmental impact statement may or an exemption of the rules of the timing may be made with the case of the agency with a decision with the subject of formal internal appeal with the agency with the formal established appeal process which allows other agencies and the public to take an appeal with the decision make the views known after the publication of the final environmental impact statement. Such cases where the real opportunity exists to alter the decision may be made with the record at the same time of the environmental impact statement as well as the means in the period of the appeal the decision of the 30-day period prescribed in paragraph B2 of the section may run concurrently with the justification for the environmental impact statement that shall explain the timing, public rights, and appeal of the agency engaged in the rulemaking under Administrative Procedure Act with this other statute purpose of protecting public health, safety, and may waive time period in paragraph B2 of this section. Published of the final rule simultaneously with the publication of the notice available to the final environmental impact statement described in paragraph A of this section. In the final environmental impact statement is filed within 90 days after the drafting environmental impact statement is filed with a minimum of 30 days period. The minimum 90-day period for the run concurrently. However, the subject paragraph D of this section, agency shall not allow less than 45 days for the comments of the draft statements. Alright, the lead agency may extend the prescribed period with the Environmental Protection Agency upon showing with the lead agency with a compelling reason for the national policy reduce the prescribed period of the may be shown owned by any of the other federal agencies. Compelling reason for the national policy also extend the prescribed period but only after the consultation lead agency. Also see 15073D. Period of timely complements shall not be sufficient reason for the extended period within lead agency to not concur with extension time. The Environmental Protection Agency may not extend it more than 30 days of the Environmental Protection Agency shall reduce the extended in any period of time shall notify the council. Alright, 1506.11, emergencies. When emergency situations make it necessary to take an action, significant environmental impact will be observed in the provision with these regulations. Federal agency take the actions consulted by the council with the alternative arrangement. The agency with the council will limit the such arrangements to the action necessary to control the immediate impact of the emergency. Other actions remain subject to the National Environmental Protection Agency National Environmental Policy Act review. 1506.12 effective date. The effective date of the regulation July 30th, 1979, except for the agency of the administrative program with the qualify under Section 1022D and the Act under 104H for the Housing Community Development Act of 1974. Additional 4 months shall be allowed for state and local agencies to adopt or implement, perceive that the regulation shall apply with the full extent practicable for the ongoing activities. Environmental documents begun before the effective date, but the regulations do not apply to the environmental impact statement. Is supplemental if the draft statement that was filed before the effective date of these regulations on completing the environmental documents not need to be redone with the reason for these regulations. Under the regulations are applicable to council guidelines published in Federal Register August 1st, 1973 shall continue to be applicable in cases where these regulations are applicable. The guidelines are superseded. However, nothing shall prevent any agency from proceeding under these regulations in an earlier time. National Environmental Protection Agency shall continue to be applicable. The actions begun before January 1st, 1970 to the full extent possible. Part 1507, Agency Compliance.